The smell of smoke is the first intruder on Christmas Eve, 1945. Inside a two-story house in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a spark ignites an inferno that rapidly consumes the lower floor. George and Jenny Sodder wake to a nightmare of blistering heat, managing to pull 4 of their children into the freezing night air. But 5 children remain trapped in the upstairs bedrooms, their screams swallowed by the roaring blaze. Desperation drives George to the side of the house, where a heavy extension ladder is always kept. It is gone. He rushes to his 2 coal trucks, intending to climb atop the cabs to reach the second-story windows. Both engines, which functioned perfectly the day before, refuse to turn over. Every immediate avenue of rescue has been systematically neutralized before the first flame even caught. Morning light reveals only a smoldering basement filled with black ash. The local fire chief takes a cursory glance at the devastation and immediately rules it an accidental electrical fire. By 10 in the morning, the investigation is essentially closed. The police declare that the 5 children perished in the blaze, their bodies completely cremated. It is a neat, tidy conclusion that ignores every glaring anomaly at the scene. The official narrative collapses under the weight of basic thermodynamics. A standard residential house fire burns at approximately 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, lasting for perhaps an hour before the fuel is exhausted. To completely incinerate human bone, a crematorium must sustain temperatures of 2,000 degrees for well over 2 hours. The forensic reality is undeniable. The children were not in the house when it burned. This lack of remains becomes the singular red thread pulling the entire case apart. When a human body burns, it leaves behind a distinct, grim signature. Skulls, femurs, and teeth do not vanish into thin air. They leave calcined fragments. Yet, an initial sweep of the Sodder basement yields 0 trace of bone, 0 trace of flesh, and 0 trace of the children who supposedly died there. Then comes the discovery that shatters the electrical fire theory entirely. The family assumes the telephone failed because the flames melted the wires. But a repairman inspecting the pole outside makes a chilling observation. The phone lines were not melted by radiant heat. They were deliberately cut. Someone had climbed the pole and cleanly severed the communication cables with a heavy tool before the fire started. The timeline fractures, revealing a calculated, cold-blooded operation. The severed lines, the missing ladder, the tampered engines. This was not a tragic accident, it was a staged diversion. The fire was meant to draw attention, to create chaos, and to cover the tracks of a targeted abduction. The perpetrators needed the family trapped outside, helpless and isolated, while they extracted the 5 children under the cover of darkness. To understand the motive, investigators eventually had to look at the patriarch. George was an outspoken Italian immigrant who built a successful trucking business, but his vocal opposition to Benito Mussolini earned him dangerous enemies. Just weeks prior, a visiting insurance salesman had threatened George, promising that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed as payback for his political remarks. Despite these overt threats, authorities actively ignore the possibility of political retaliation or mafia involvement. The local coroner issues 5 death certificates before a thorough excavation of the site is even attempted. The police refuse to interview the insurance salesman or investigate the strange men seen watching the children walk home from school. The official inertia leaves the parents utterly abandoned by the law. Driven by agonizing doubt, George takes matters into his own hands. Months later, he bulldozes dirt over the basement to create a memorial garden, but gnawing suspicion forces him to dig it back up. He and Jenny sift through the contaminated soil. They finally uncover a few small bone fragments and a piece of a dictionary. It feels like a grim resolution, but it is a trap. A pathologist at the Smithsonian Institution examines the newly discovered fragments and delivers a shocking verdict. The bones belong to a single individual, likely a young adult, far older than any of the missing children. Furthermore, the fragments show absolutely no signs of fire damage. They were planted in the dirt long after the embers had cooled, a clumsy attempt to force the family to accept the deaths. This planted evidence shifts the entire landscape of the investigation. The realization that someone returned to seed the ashes with foreign bones proves that a coordinated cover-up is actively unfolding. The case transitions from a localized tragedy into a sprawling kidnapping plot. The children did not die in the basement. They were taken, and whoever took them is still trying to manipulate the narrative from the shadows. The parents transform their grief into a relentless public crusade. They erect a massive billboard along Route 16, featuring the faces of the 5 missing children. It stands as a towering monument to unresolved trauma and a direct challenge to the incompetent authorities. The billboard stares down at passing motorists for decades, a daily reminder that the official story is a fabricated lie. Sightings begin to pour in from across the country, painting a disturbing picture of the children's movements. A woman managing a tourist court in South Carolina claims she served them breakfast the morning after the fire, noting they were accompanied by adults of Italian descent. A hotel worker in Florida reports seeing the children a week later, stating the adults were hostile and refused to let anyone speak to the kids. Living in this state of suspended animation exacts a brutal psychological toll on George and Jenny. They are trapped in a liminal space between hope and mourning, unable to hold a funeral, yet unable to find their children. Every lead is a fresh wound, every dead end a suffocating weight. They leave the front door unlocked every single night, a heartbreaking ritual of anticipation for footsteps that never come. Decades pass and the trail grows agonizingly cold until 1968, when a letter arrives from Central City, Kentucky. Inside is a photograph of a young man in his late 20s, bearing a striking resemblance to Lewis, who was 9 at the time of the disappearance. The facial structure, the dark hair, the distinctive slope of the brow, it is the most compelling piece of physical evidence the family has received. The back of the photograph bears a cryptic handwritten message that deepens the mystery. It reads, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. A lil boys, A90132 or 35. The text is a bizarre mixture of seemingly affectionate family references and incomprehensible codes. Is it a desperate signal from a captive son trying to reach out across the decades, or a cruel taunt from the people who orchestrated the abduction? Desperate for answers, the family hires a private investigator to travel to Kentucky and track down the source of the photograph. The investigator arrives in Central City, begins asking questions, and then abruptly vanishes. He is never seen or heard from again. The lead evaporates into the humid southern air, swallowed by the same invisible forces that took the children. The photograph remains a haunting artifact. The failure of the 1945 investigators was not merely a product of rural incompetence. It was a willful blindness to the orchestrated malice beneath the ashes. By refusing to look past the smoke, they allowed a meticulously planned kidnapping to be written off as a tragic accident. They ignored the cut wires, the missing ladder,
and the impossible thermodynamics, choosing the path of least resistance over the terrifying truth. The billboard on Route 16 is gone now, but the red thread of this case remains intact, winding through the decades. It connects a severed phone line in the freezing dark to a cryptic photograph sent 23 years later. It is a stark reminder that some fires are not meant to destroy life, but to erase it. The 5 children vanished into the smoke, leaving behind a mystery that continues to burn.